Chapter 25. Avasalam Vladimirovich Iznurenkov. Busy time began for the concessionaires. Ostap argued that the chairs needed to be forged while they were hot. Ippolit Matveyevich was amnestied, although from time to time Ostap interrogated him. "And what the hell did I get involved with you for? Why do I need you, actually? You should go home to the registry office. The dead are waiting for you there, the newborns. Don't torment the babies. Go." But in his heart the great schemer became attached to the wild leader. It's not so funny to live without him, Ostap thought, and he looked laughingly at Vorobyaninov, who already had a silver lawn sprouting on his head. In the work plan, Ippolit Matveyevich's initiative was given a decent place. As soon as the quiet former student Ivan Apullo left, Bender hammered into his companion the shortest paths to finding treasures. Act boldly, don't ask anyone. More cynicism. People like it. Don't undertake anything through third parties. There are no more fools. No one will drag diamonds out of someone else's pocket for you, but without criminal activity either. We must honor the code. And yet the searches were not going particularly well. The criminal code and the huge number of bourgeois prejudices preserved by the inhabitants of the capital were interfering. They, for example, couldn't stand night visits through the transom. We had to work only legally. In the room of student Ivan Apullo, on the day of Ostap's visit to Elochka Shukina, furniture appeared. It was a chair exchanged for a tea strainer, the third trophy of the expedition. The time when the hunt for diamonds aroused powerful emotions in the companions, when they tore the chairs with their claws and gnawed at their springs, had long passed. "Even if there's nothing in the chairs," Ostap said, "consider that we've earned at least 10,000. Each open chair increases our chances. So what if there's nothing in the lady's chair? That's no reason to break it. Let Ivan Apullo furnish his room. It's more pleasant for us." On the same day, the concessionaires fluttered out of the pink house and dispersed in different directions. Ippolit Matveyevich was entrusted with the bleeding stranger from Sadovospasskaya, given 25 rubles for expenses, ordered not to go into beer halls, and not to return without a chair. The great schemer took Elochka's husband for himself. Ippolit Matveyevich crossed the city on bus number 6. Shaking on the leather bench and flying under the very lacquered ceiling of the carriage, he thought about how to find out the name of the bleeding citizen, under what pretext to enter his place, what to say in the first phrase, and how to get to the very essence. Having disembarked at the red gate, he found the desired house at the address recorded by Ostap and began to walk around it. He couldn't bring himself to enter. It was an old, dirty Moscow hotel, turned into a housing association, staffed, judging by the dilapidated facade, by malicious non-payers. Ippolit Matveyevich stood for a long time opposite the entrance, approached it, memorized the handwritten announcement with threats to the malicious non-payers, and without thinking of anything, went up to the second floor. Individual rooms opened into the corridor. Slowly, as if he were approaching the blackboard to prove a theorem he hadn't learned, Ippolit Matveyevich approached room number 41. A business card the color of a worn-out starch collar hung on the door, head down on one tack. Avasalam Vladimirovich Iznurenkov. In complete darkness, Ippolit Matveyevich forgot to knock and open the door, which turned out to be unlocked, took 3 steps like a sleepwalker, and found himself in the middle of the room. "Excuse me," he said in a strangled voice, "can I see Comrade Iznurenkov?" Avasalam Vladimirovich did not answer. Vorobyaninov raised his head and only now saw that there was no one in the room. It was impossible to determine the inclinations of its owner from the appearance of the room. It was only clear that he was single and had no servants. A piece of paper with sausage skins lay on the windowsill. The couch by the wall was littered with newspapers. Several dusty books stood on a small shelf. Colored photographs of cats, kittens, and pussycats looked down from the walls. In the middle of the room, next to dirty boots lying on their side, stood a walnut chair. Crimson ceiling wax seals dangled on all the pieces of furniture, including the chair from the Starogorod mansion. But Ippolit Matveyevich didn't pay attention to this. He immediately forgot about the criminal code, about Ostap's instructions, and jumped to the chair. At this time, the newspapers on the couch stirred. Ippolit Matveyevich was frightened. The newspapers crawled and fell off the couch. A calm kitten came out from under them. He looked indifferently at Ippolit Matveyevich and began to wash himself, grabbing his ear, cheek, and mustache with his paw. "Aha," said Ippolit Matveyevich. Dragged the chair to the door. The door opened by itself. The owner of the room, the bleeding stranger, appeared on the threshold. He was wearing a coat from under which lilac long johns could be seen. He was holding pants in his hand. About Avasalam Vladimirovich Iznurenkov, it could be said that there was no other such person in the entire Republic. The Republic valued him for his merits. He brought great benefit to it. Yet he remained unknown, although in his art he was as much a master as Chalyapin in singing, Gorky in literature, Capablanca in chess, Melnikov in skating, and the most nosy, most brown Assyrian, occupying the best place at the corner of Tverskaya and Kamergersky, in cleaning boots with yellow cream. Chalyapin sang, Gorky wrote a big novel, Capablanca was preparing for a match with Alekhine, Melnikov was breaking records, the Assyrian brought the citizens' boots to a sunny shine, Avasalam Iznurenkov cracked jokes. He never cracked jokes aimlessly, for the sake of a clever word. He cracked jokes on assignments from humorous magazines. He carried the most responsible campaigns on his shoulders. He supplied themes for drawings and feuilletons to most Moscow satirical magazines. Great people crack jokes twice in their lives. These jokes increase their fame and go down in history. Izhnerenkov released no less than 60 first-class jokes a month, which were repeated with a smile by everyone and yet remained unknown. If a drawing was signed with Izhnerenkov's joke, the glory went to the artist. The artist's name was placed above the drawing. Izhnerenkov's name was not there. "It's terrible," he shouted. "It's impossible to sign. What am I going to sign? Under 2 lines." He continued to fight zealously against the enemies of society, bad cooperators, embezzlers, chamberlain, and bureaucrats. He stung with his joke sycophants, building managers, private traders, heads of departments, hooligans, citizens who did not want to lower prices, and economic managers who shirked the austerity regime. After the magazines were released, the jokes were pronounced from the circus arena, reprinted by evening newspapers without indicating the source, and presented to the public from the stage by author coupletists. Izhnerenkov managed to crack jokes in those areas where it seemed that nothing funny could be said anymore. From such a meager desert as inflated markups on cost, Izhnerenkov managed to squeeze out about 100 masterpieces of humor. Heine would have given up if he had been asked to say something funny, and at the same time socially useful about the incorrect tarification of low-speed cargo. Mark Twain would have run away from such a topic, but Izhnerenkov remained at his post. He ran through the editorial rooms, bumping into ashtrays and bleeding. In 10 minutes the topic was processed, the drawing was thought out, and the title was attached. Seeing a man carrying away a sealed chair in his room, Avasalam Vladimirovich waved the pants just ironed by the tailor, jumped up, and clucked. "You're crazy, I protest. You have no right. There is after all a law, although it's not written for fools, but you may know by hearsay that the furniture can stand for another 2 weeks. I'll complain to the prosecutor. I'll pay finally." Ippolit Matveyevich stood in place, and Izhnerenkov threw off his coat and, without moving away from the door, pulled his pants over his full legs like Chichikov's. Izhnerenkov was stout, but his face was thin. Vorobyaninov had no doubt that he would now be grabbed and dragged to the police. Therefore, he was extremely surprised when the owner of the room, having coped with his toilet, suddenly calmed down. "Understand," the owner began in a conciliatory tone, "I can't agree to this." Ippolit Matveyevich, in the place of the owner of the room, also would not have been able to agree in the end that his chairs were being stolen in broad daylight, but he didn't know what to say, and therefore remained silent. "It's not my fault, it's Musbrid's fault. Yes, I confess. I haven't paid for the rental piano for 8 months, but I didn't sell it, although I had every opportunity to do so. I acted honestly, and they acted like crooks. They took the instrument and even filed a lawsuit and inventoried the furniture. I have nothing to inventory. This furniture is a tool of production, and the chair is also a tool of production." Ippolit Matveyevich began to figure something out. "Let go of the chair," Avasalam Vladimirovich suddenly squealed. "Do you hear, you bureaucrat?" Ippolit Matveyevich obediently released the chair and stammered. "Excuse me, misunderstanding. Such is the service." Here Izhnerenkov became terribly amused. He ran around the room and sang, and in the morning she smiled again before her window, as always. He didn't know what to do with his hands. They were flying around. He began to tie his tie and, without tying it, threw it down, then grabbed a newspaper, and without reading anything in it, threw it on the floor. "So you won't take the furniture today? Good. Ippolit Matveyevich, taking advantage of the favorable circumstances, moved towards the door. "Wait," Izhnerenkov suddenly shouted. "Have you ever seen such a cat? Tell me, is he really fluffy to an extraordinary degree?" The kitten found himself in Ippolit Matveyevich's trembling hands. "High class," Avasalam Vladimirovich muttered, not knowing what to do with the excess of his energy. Ah. He rushed to the window, threw up his hands, and began to bow frequently and shallowly to 2 girls who were looking at him from the window of the opposite house. He shuffled in place and lavished languid sighs. Girls from the suburbs, the best fruit, high class, and in the morning she smiled again before her window as always. "So I'll go, citizen," the chief director of the concession said stupidly. Wait, Izhnerenkov suddenly became agitated. 1 minute, and the kitten, is he really fluffy to an extraordinary degree? Wait, I'll be right back. He rummaged embarrassedly in all his pockets, ran away, returned, gasped, looked out the window, ran away again, and returned again. "Excuse me, darling," he said to Vorobyaninov, who, during all these manipulations, stood with his arms folded like a soldier. With these words, he gave the leader 50 kopecks. No, please don't refuse. All work must be paid for." "I'm very grateful," said Ippolit Matveyevich, surprised at his resourcefulness. "Thank you, dear, thank you, darling." Walking along the corridor, Ippolit Matveyevich heard bleating, squealing, singing, and passionate cries coming from Izhnerenkov's room. On the street, Vorobyaninov remembered Ostap and trembled with fear. Ernest Pavlovich Shukin wandered around the empty apartment, kindly seated to him for the summer by a friend, and decided the question, to take a bath or not to take a bath. The 3-room apartment was located under the very roof of a 9-story building. In the apartment, besides the desk and Vorobyaninov chair, there was only a dressing table. The sun was reflected in the mirror and cut his eyes. The engineer lay down on the desk but immediately jumped up. Everything was red hot. "I'll go wash," he decided. He undressed, cooled down, looked at himself in the mirror, and went to the bathroom. The coolness seized him. He climbed into the bathtub, poured water over himself from a blue enameled mug, and lathered himself generously. He was all covered in flakes of foam and looked like a Christmas tree Santa. "Good," said Ernest Pavlovich. Everything was good. It became cool. His wife was not there. Complete freedom was ahead. The engineer sat down and turned the tap to wash off the soap. The tap choked and began to say something unintelligible slowly. There was no water. Ernest Pavlovich stuck his slippery little finger into the tap opening. A thin stream poured out, but there was nothing more. Ernest Pavlovich frowned, got out of the bathtub, taking out his legs one at a time, and went to the kitchen tap, but there he also failed to milk anything. Ernest Pavlovich shuffled into the rooms and stopped in front of the mirror. The foam stung his eyes, his back itched, soapy flakes fell on the parquet. Listening to whether water was running in the bathroom, Ernest Pavlovich decided to call the janitor. Let him at least bring water, the engineer decided, wiping his eyes and slowly boiling over, or who knows what. He looked out the window. Children were playing at the very bottom of the courtyard shaft. "Janitor," Ernest Pavlovich shouted. "Janitor." No one answered. And Ernest Pavlovich remembered that the janitor lived in the front entrance, under the stairs. He stepped onto the cold tiles and, holding the door with his hand, leaned down. There was only one apartment on the landing, and Ernest Pavlovich was not afraid that he might be seen in a strange outfit of soapy flakes. "Janitor," he shouted down. The word thundered and rolled noisily down the steps. "Goo goo," the staircase replied. "Janitor, janitor." "Gum gum, gum gum." Here the engineer, impatiently shuffling his bare feet, slipped and, to maintain his balance, released the door from his hand. The wall trembled. The door clicked shut with the copper tongue of the American lock and closed. Ernest Pavlovich, not yet understanding the irreparability of what had happened, pulled the door handle. The door did not give way. The engineer jerked it several more times in bewilderment and listened with a beating heart. There was a twilight church silence. Light barely broke through the multicolored glasses of the towering window. "A situation," Ernest Pavlovich thought. "What a bastard," he said to the door. Below, human voices began to boom and explode like firecrackers. Then, like a loudspeaker, a house dog barked. A baby carriage was being pushed up the stairs. Ernest Pavlovich paced the landing timidly. "You could go crazy." It seemed to him that all this was too wild to have actually happened. He went to the door again and listened. He heard some new sounds. At first, it seemed to him that someone was walking in the apartment. Maybe someone came from the back door, he thought, although he knew that the back door was closed and no one could enter the apartment. Monotonous noise continued. The engineer held his breath. Then he realized that this noise was produced by splashing water. It was obviously running from all the taps in the apartment. Ernest Pavlovich almost burst into tears. The situation was terrible. In Moscow, in the center of the city, on the landing of the 9th floor, stood an adult, mustachioed man with a higher education, absolutely naked and covered with still-moving soapy foam. He had nowhere to go. He would rather go to jail than appear in such a form. There remained only one thing: to disappear. The foam burst and burned his back. On his hands and on his face, it had already hardened, become like scabs, and tightened the skin like a razor stone. Half an hour passed like this. The engineer rubbed against the lime walls, groaned, and several times unsuccessfully tried to break down the door. He became dirty and terrible. Shukin decided to go down to the janitor, no matter what it cost him. There's no other way out, no way, just hide with the janitor. Gasping and covering himself with his hand as men do when entering the water, Ernest Pavlovich slowly began to steal along the railing. He found himself on the landing between the 8th and 9th floors. His figure was illuminated by multicolored rhombuses and squares of the window. He became like Harlequin, eavesdropping on the conversation of Columbine with Pierrot. He had already turned into a new flight of stairs when the door lock of the lower apartment fired, and a young lady with a ballet suitcase flew out of the apartment. Before the young lady could take a step, Ernest Pavlovich was already on his landing. He was almost deaf from the terrible blows of his heart. Only after half an hour did the engineer recover and was able to undertake a new sortie. This time, he firmly decided to rush down swiftly and, paying no attention to anything, run to the cherished janitor's lodge. That's what he did, jumping silently over 4 steps and whimpering. A member of the bureau of the section of engineers and technicians galloped down. On the landing of the 6th floor, he stopped for a second. This ruined him. Someone was coming up from below. "Annoying boy," a female voice was heard, amplified many times by the staircase loudspeaker. How many times have I told him? Ernest Pavlovich, obeying not reason, but instinct, like a cat pursued by dogs, flew up to the 9th floor. Finding himself on his soiled landing with wet footprints, he wept silently, pulling his hair and convulsively rocking. Boiling tears cut into the soapy crust and burned two wavy parallel furrows in it. "Lord," said the engineer, my God, my God." There was no life, and in the meantime, he distinctly heard the noise of a truck running along the street, so somewhere people were living. He urged himself several more times to go down, but could not. His nerves gave out. He fell into a crypt. "They've left a mess behind them, like pigs," he heard an old woman's voice from the lower landing. Engineer ran to the wall and butted it several times with his head. The most reasonable thing would have been, of course, to shout until someone came, and then surrender to the comer as a prisoner. But Ernest Pavlovitch completely lost the ability to think, and breathing heavily, spun around the landing. There was no way out.